He was 6 feet deep in his own grave when the first girl appeared. Not digging it for himself, not yet. This one was for a stranger, a drifter found frozen near the creek bed, no name, no story left in his pockets. The shovel cut through the frozen earth with a clean, harsh sound. He liked the rhythm, the simple work. It kept the other things out. The river was swollen, brown with spring melt, rushing loud enough to cover most sounds. He heard her anyway. A splash, a cry cut short by the cold. He dropped the shovel. Through the bare branches, across the roiling water, he saw movement. Not a deer, something human, a woman. Her dark hair streamed behind her, plastered to her face by the current. Riders were on the bank she'd just left, dark shapes against the gray sky, yelling. Gunshots followed, flat cracks swallowed mostly by the river's roar. She was wounded. He saw the way her body listed, fighting the pull, fighting the cold. His hand found the worn wood of his rifle stock, leaning against a pine. His fingers closed around it. He watched her struggle, the water trying to claim her. The riders weren't slowing. They'd cross or find a ford soon. He didn't move, he didn't think. He just watched the small, desperate figure in the brutal water. Uncertainty was a bitter taste in his mouth. His mind offered reasons not to move. She was Apache. He was just a man in the woods. His past was a heavy coat he couldn't shed. Interfering meant trouble. It meant drawing attention. It meant the quiet life he'd scraped out, the life he was trying to live buried deep in the trees, was over. Let the river take her. Let the riders finish it. The thoughts came cold and logical, but his boots were already wet. He was already walking towards the bank. The rifle felt suddenly lighter, or perhaps his arms felt stronger. The river roared, indifferent. The riders shouted, closing in. He waded into the current, the shock of the cold stealing his breath. It was a choice made without thinking. A gut pull. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't not. The current fought him, pulling at his legs, trying to make him stumble. It pulled at her too, a relentless, indifferent force. He reached her just as her struggles weakened, her face submerged for a moment before bobbing back up, eyes closed. Her clothes were heavy, dragging her down. He grabbed her arm, slick with river water and something else, something dark he didn't want to see. Pulling was hard. The river fought. He used his own weight, dug his heels into the shifting gravel bottom. One step back, then another. His muscles screamed, the cold burned his skin. He focused on her weight, the dead weight trying to pull him under with her. He didn't look back at the riders. He didn't need to. He knew they were coming. He hauled her onto the bank, out of the river's grip. She lay limp, coughing water, shivering violently. Blood stained the front of her tunic, a dark bloom spreading from her side. She was young, younger than he'd first thought, just a girl. He knelt beside her, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't know her name, her tribe, what she'd done, or what had been done to her. None of it mattered in that moment. The river had almost taken her. He had pulled her back. The sound of the river was loud, covering the sounds from the other bank now. He listened anyway, straining his ears. He needed to move her. Now, before they crossed, he didn't know why he helped. He just knew he had, and the choice felt final. His cabin was small, built of rough-hewn logs, tucked deep in a narrow canyon. Smoke from its stone chimney was the only sign of life for miles. He carried her there, wrapped her in a coarse wool blanket, laid her on the narrow cot near the fireplace. The fire crackled, throwing hesitant warmth into the room. He cleaned the gunshot graze on her side, shallow but bleeding freely. Her shoulder was unnatural, a sickening angle, dislocated. He set it with a quick, hard pull, ignoring her sharp gasp, even in unconsciousness. There were other marks. Faint, crisscrossing lines on her back and shoulders, partially healed. Lash marks, old ones, some newer. Someone had worked hard to leave their signature on her skin, someone cruel. He finished tending her, cleaned the cabin as best he could, wiped the blood from his hands. He sat by the fire, watching her sleep, her breathing shallow. The cabin felt different with her in it. Smaller, tenser. She woke quietly without a sound, her eyes snapping open. Dark eyes, wide and sharp, scanning the room, the walls, him. Instantly alert. There was no confusion in them, only wariness, like a cornered animal. She saw his rifle leaning by the door, his knife on the table. Her hand went instinctively to her waist, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. Finding nothing, her fingers curled into a tight fist in the blanket. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. Just watched him, her body still, ready to spring. He didn't move. He didn't offer comfort. Just let her see him, see the cabin. Let her see there was no threat from him. Not here, not now. The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken. She sat up slowly, testing her mended shoulder with a wince. Her eyes never left him. He didn't offer her water, didn't ask her name. Her injuries were the only story he needed right now. The gunshot graze, raw and red. The shoulder now sitting right but clearly still aching. And the lash marks, fading maps of past torments. They spoke louder than any words. They told of pain, of endurance, of a will that had been tested and not broken. Someone hadn't just chased her. Someone had held her, worked on her, tried to make her yield. The thought settled in his gut, cold and hard. He watched her, saw the subtle shifts in her eyes as she took in the cabin, the few sparse belongings, the fire. He was a stranger. This was a cage, albeit one with a fire and a roof. She didn't know his intentions. He barely knew them himself. The silence was her shield. His allowing it was something else. A waiting game. He just let her be. He cooked salt pork and beans over the fire, simple food, survival food. He gave her a plate, set it on the cot beside her. She watched him carefully as he served himself. She ate slowly, deliberately, eyes still darting around the cabin, checking the door, the window, him. She ate everything. He ate too, the quiet sounds of chewing and swallowing loud in the small space. There was no attempt at conversation. He didn't offer any, didn't ask if it was good. Didn't tell her his name, just the shared act of eating. Two strangers thrown together by a river and a chase. The door was unbarred. He had made sure of that when he came in. A clear signal. She was free to leave, to run, to disappear back into the trees. After they finished, he washed the plates, hung them on the wall hooks. He stoked the fire. The sun was beginning to dip below the canyon rim, painting the sky in bruised colors. A thin fog was starting to curl in the valley floor outside. Then he heard them, faint at first, carried on the damp air. The distinct sound of horses, more than one or two. Hoofbeats muffled by the fog in the distance but unmistakable, across the ridge, maybe a mile or two out. He walked to the small window opening, wiped a clear spot on the condensation. He could just make them out through the thickening mist. 3 riders, dark shapes moving deliberately along the high ground. One of them caught the last of the light, something reflecting brightly from his head. A silver hatband. He turned from the window. Naya was watching him, her expression unreadable. He didn't say anything about the riders. He didn't need to. His actions spoke. He walked to the door, slid the heavy bar into place. He didn't usually bar it. He walked to the window, took a hammer and nails from a shelf and began hammering shut the wooden shutters from the inside. The sound was loud in the small cabin. It was a clear message. The outside world was coming closer. The choice had just narrowed for both of them. He didn't have to tell her they were coming. She saw the nails, heard the hammer blows. She understood. The cabin was no longer just a refuge. It was becoming a fort, a trap, or maybe, just maybe, a place to make a stand. He finished with the window, the last rays of light now gone, leaving the cabin lit only by the firelight. He walked to the corner where his rifle usually stood. He picked it up, checked the action, the hammer, the loaded chamber. It was an old Spencer carbine, reliable. He walked to the small wooden table that sat between the cot and the fireplace. He set the rifle down on it, not sliding it across, not pushing it at her, just placing it there, accessible, a clear, deliberate action. Then he looked at her. "You know how to use one?" he asked. His voice was low, gravelly from disuse. The first words he had spoken directly to her since he pulled her from the river. Her eyes fixed on the rifle. Then they lifted to his face. She didn't speak, didn't ask why, didn't ask who he thought was coming. She just looked at the weapon, looked at him. Her chin dipped once. A single short nod, that was all, but it carried the weight of many words. It said she understood the question, understood the implication, understood the potential need, and she had the knowledge. He didn't ask anything else, didn't test her, didn't pry. The nod was enough. It changed something in the air between them, a silent acknowledgement, A shift from rescuer and rescued to something else, something shared. He left the rifle there. He went back to his seat by the fire, picking up a worn piece of leather to mend. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Less empty, more watchful. Later that night, after the fire had burned down to glowing embers, she rose from the cot. He watched her, pretending to sleep, listening to the small sound she made. She walked to the fireplace, knelt there for a moment. She drew something from inside her tunic, a small piece of cloth. He saw faint, dark markings on it in the dim light. Tribal markings, perhaps. She held it for a moment, her shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly. Then she dropped it into the hottest part of the embers. The cloth flared briefly, then curled and blackened, disappearing into ash. She stayed there for a long time, kneeling by the fire, her head bowed. He heard a small sound then, a catch in her breath, a silent sob. She was crying, but she made no sound. She burned something precious, something that held memory, perhaps, grief. He watched her until she finally rose and returned to the cot. He didn't ask what it was, didn't ask why she burned it. Some things were too private for questions. The ashes in the stove held more story than he was likely to ever hear. The next morning the fog was thick, pressing against the nailed shutters. The sounds of the forest were muted. He went outside briefly, just past the cabin edge, to check the small creek that ran nearby. It was there he saw them. Boot prints in the damp earth near the water's edge. Not his. Larger, heavier boots. 3 sets. They hadn't crossed the river. They had found a ford, or perhaps they had come down from the ridge during the night. They were close. Closer than he'd thought. He knelt, examining the tracks. They seemed to pause here, look around, before heading back the way they came, towards the east, checking the creek, checking the most likely path down the canyon. They knew where he lived, or at least they knew someone lived here, and they were searching the area. He returned to the cabin. Naya was sitting on the cot, the rifle still on the table. He didn't need to show her the tracks, he just looked at her. They were by the creek, he said. Simple fact. No alarm in his voice, just information. She nodded, that single, short dip of her chin again. She stood up, walked to his small supply shelf, found a spool of fishing line and a small tin cup he used for coffee. He watched her. She walked to the nailed window, worked the line through a tiny gap near the top, attached the tin cup to the end. Then she paid out the line, guiding it carefully through another gap on the opposite side, running it low across the floor near the door. A tripwire, crude, simple, effective. The tin cup would clatter against the wooden wall if someone opened the door or stepped on the line. She wasn't just waiting to be protected. She was part of the defense. She wasn't a victim. Not entirely. They spent the morning preparing. Ellie checked his limited stores, his extra powder and shot. Naya helped him barricade the door further, piling wood against it. The silence between them was different again. Not just wary, but shared purpose. As they worked, the silence felt less like a barrier, more like a space where words weren't needed. He found himself talking, low and quiet, about the cabin, the woods, the traps he used to set. Small, unimportant things. Then, standing by the fireplace, looking into the embers of her burned cloth, he said something he hadn't said to anyone in years. "I was a scout," he told her. His voice was flat. "For the cavalry." He paused, before I knew what that meant. The words hung in the air, confession, a past he regretted, a past that might explain why riders were hunting an Apache girl. She looked at him then, really looked. Not with wariness, but with something that might have been understanding, or just calculation. He couldn't tell. She didn't ask him to explain, didn't ask what he had done as a scout, what he knew about the cavalry and tribes. She just held his gaze for a long moment, and in her eyes the hard edges seemed to soften, just slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. He hadn't asked for it. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a bridge, small and fragile, built across the chasm of their pasts. He had shown her a piece of his wound. She didn't flinch. She didn't answer in words, just that subtle shift in her expression. It felt like enough for now. They needed more firewood. Their small store was dwindling and the nights were still cold. Leaving the cabin felt like a risk, but a necessary one. They went together, Illy carrying the axe, Naya walking beside him, eyes scanning the trees, the rifle held ready. They worked efficiently, cutting deadfalls, splitting logs. The air was crisp, the silence broken only by the ring of the axe and the snap of breaking branches. Felt strange working alongside her, natural in a way that surprised him. They loaded the wood onto his old travois. As they started back, they saw it, smoke, not the thin wisp of his chimney, thick black smoke boiling into the sky from the direction of the cabin. They dropped the travois and ran, not speaking, just running. A cold dread seized his gut. He knew instantly the tracks by the creek, the silver hatband. They hadn't just been scouting. They'd found it, found her. They burst into the small clearing where his cabin stood, or where it had stood. Flames roared, consuming the log walls, licking up towards the sky. The roof had already collapsed inwards, a shower of sparks and burning timbers. His cabin, his only home, gone. He stood rooted to the spot, watching it burn, the heat washing over him. On a half-burned beam near the door frame, still visible through the flames, something was scrawled in charcoal. A message. He read the stark letters. Savages don't get second chances. They watched until the cabin was nothing but a smoldering ruin. The fire died down slowly, leaving behind a black scar on the landscape. Everything was gone. Food stores, blankets, tools, his few books, memories attached to the rough walls. Everything except the clothes on their backs, his rifle, and the axe. The message was clear. It wasn't just about Naya. It was about him too now. He had chosen a side, unknowingly perhaps, but irreversibly. Protecting her meant becoming a target. They didn't have a roof, a fire, or walls anymore. They had the clothes they wore and the open sky above them. He felt a weariness settle deep into his bones, heavier than any log he'd ever split. But looking at Naya's face in the fading light, illuminated by the dying embers of his home, he didn't see defeat. He saw something else. They slept curled together for warmth near the burned-out cabin, the ground still radiating a faint heat. The stars were impossibly bright in the canyon sky. Sleep didn't come easy. The smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. In the quiet dark, Naya finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you save me?" The question hung in the night. Simple, direct. He didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense in the face of losing everything. Not one that explained the pull of the river, the instinct that had made him wade in. He thought about the grave he was digging when he first saw her, the life he was burying himself in. He thought about the lash marks, the wild eyes. He turned his head slightly to look at her, a dark shape beside him. "I didn't," he said. His voice was rough. "You're the one still standing." It wasn't a lie. He'd pulled her out of the river, but she had woken up. She had reached for a knife. She had strung a tripwire. She had nodded when he offered the rifle. She had endured things that would have broken others. He hadn't saved her strength. He'd just given it a chance. She didn't reply, just lay there breathing softly. He felt a shift within him, not a grand realization, just a quiet acceptance. The life he tried to bury was gone. This new one under the open sky with a hunted girl had begun. With the cabin gone, they couldn't stay. The valley was compromised. They needed a new plan, a new direction. Illy knew a place. A small settlement nestled high up in the mountains across a treacherous canyon. Mercy Ridge. It wasn't much more than a collection of shacks and a trading post, home to drifters, outlaws, anyone looking to disappear. "Nobody asks questions there," he told Naya the next morning, gesturing vaguely towards the high peaks. "Might be safe." It wasn't much of a promise. Safe was relative out here. She listened, her gaze fixed on the horizon he indicated. Safe wasn't what he read in her eyes. There was a hardness there now, tempered by the fire that had taken their shelter. "Mercy Ridge," she repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. She paused, then nodded. "We will go." Her agreement wasn't about refuge. He felt it, knew it instinctively. It was about direction, a path, towards something. Not away from danger, but perhaps straight through it. Towards whatever it was she sought. Whatever revenge or justice the silver hat man represented. They packed what little they had salvaged, the rifle, the axe, a half-burned pot, 2 blankets, and they started walking, turning their backs on the smoke and ash that had been his home, heading for the treacherous path across the canyon. The trail to Mercy Ridge was steep and unforgiving. It wound through narrow passes and along sheer drops. They moved cautiously, conserving energy, Naya still favoring her shoulder. As they rounded a bend in a high, rocky defile, they saw them, waiting. 5 men this time, mounted, heavily armed. They wore a mix of military-style gear and rough cowboy clothes, hired guns, an old war party reformed for new masters. One of them sat a little apart, mounted on a fine bay horse. A silver hatband gleamed in the harsh mountain sun. Thornton. Illy recognized him from the wanted posters he'd seen tacked up in dusty saloons years ago. A man known for tracking down anyone for the right price, including people who didn't want to be found. Recognition flashed on Thornton's face as he saw Naya. A slow, cruel smile spread across his mouth. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice echoing in the canyon. "Look what the river dragged in. Thought we'd lost you, savage girl." Naya froze beside Illy. Her body went rigid, her eyes fixed on Thornton. Pure, unadulterated fear flickered there for a bare second, quickly replaced by something colder, harder. Illy's hand went to the rifle he carried. He didn't speak, just held it loose but ready. The other 4 men shifted, hands hovering near their sidearms. A standoff, in a place where a single shot could start a rock slide. Thornton didn't draw, not yet. He just watched Naya, enjoying the moment. "We can do this easy," he said, his eyes flicking to Illy, dismissing him. "Or hard, your choice." The air crackled with tension. They didn't run. They didn't speak. Just stood there, 2 figures against 5, the canyon walls silent witnesses. The standoff broke without violence. Another rider appeared on the trail behind Thornton's men, calling out something about a scout spotting more tracks higher up. Thornton spat on the ground, his cruel smile tightening into a grimace. "You got lucky," he told Naya, "this time." He gestured to his men and they turned their horses, riding back the way they came, leaving them alone on the trail. They waited until the sound of hooves faded completely. The tension eased, but the threat felt heavier now, personal. Naya finally slumped against the canyon wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't speak immediately. Illy didn't prompt her. He knew the encounter had torn open old wounds. Later, sitting by a small fire they'd built under an overhang, she finally told him. Her voice was low, flat, telling a story she had clearly lived over and over in her mind. "They came at dawn," she said. "The soldiers, they said it was a patrol looking for renegades." She scoffed, a bitter sound. "It was a lie. They killed the men first. The women they took." Her voice trembled. "They took us to a place like a fort, but old, broken." She paused, swallowing hard. "Sister," she fought, they hurt her bad. Her hands clenched into fists. "I watched. They made me watch." Then she spoke the name. Thornton was there. He wasn't in uniform. He gave the orders. Then he sold us to men who liked to break things. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "My sister died screaming. I ran when I could from the place they took us. That's when they chased me to the river. Not what she did, what she witnessed. That's why they wanted her dead." The trail eventually led them to a burned-out mission high in the hills. Stone walls blackened by fire, a skeletal bell tower reaching towards the sky. It looked like a place of death. It was. Inside the ruined chapel, the smell of decay was thick, mingled with old smoke. It was worse than Illy expected. Corpses. Some recent, some just skeletons clothed in rags, hung from the rafters. Men, women, children. Naya walked through the ruins slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She stopped in the center of the chapel, looking up at the grim display. "This is where they brought the girls," she said, her voice hollow. The confirmation was a punch to the gut. The place she ran from, a place of torment and death. Systemic evil etched in bone and fire. Illy couldn't stay inside. He walked back out into the thin mountain air, leaving her alone with the dead. He sat on a fallen stone column, looking out over the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky with false beauty. He thought of the faces Naya had seen, the screams she had heard. He thought of his own past, the things he had seen and done as a scout, the way he had turned away from the ugliness. He hadn't prayed in 20 years, not since his brother died. Prayer felt like a useless thing in a world like this. But sitting there, surrounded by death and the memory of suffering, with the weight of Nea's story heavy in the air, he bowed his head. He didn't know what words to use. He just sat in the silence and tried to pray. For the dead, for Nea, for a world that could birth such places. They left the mission behind, the silent dead watching them go. They walked through the night, pushing themselves, the image of the chapel burned into their minds. By dawn, they were nearing Mercy Ridge. It was a small cluster of buildings in a high mountain meadow. Salvation, maybe, or another kind of trap. Then Nea stopped. Ellie stopped with her. He followed her gaze. The men, Thornton and his hired guns, 5 of them. They were positioned at the entrance to the meadow, blocking the only path in. They hadn't gone back. They had circled around, anticipated their destination. Ellie felt a weariness wash over him. They were outnumbered, outgunned, exhausted. Running seemed like the only option. Find another path, circle back, disappear into the mountains again. But Nea didn't move. She stood tall, shoulders back, facing the men. Her eyes were hard now, stripped of fear, filled with a cold resolve he hadn't seen before. "We don't run," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning air. Ellie hesitated, looked at the 5 armed men, the open ground, looked at Nea. This was a fight they couldn't win. She saw his hesitation, walked to where he stood, reached out and took the rifle from his hands. Her fingers closed around the stock. It wasn't a request. It was a decision, her decision. The hunted had stopped running. The shootout at Mercy Ridge wasn't long, but it was brutal. Dust kicked up from the dry ground, mixing with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The hired guns were good, but they were mercenaries. Nea was fighting for something else entirely. She moved with a fluid grace Ellie hadn't expected, using the sparse cover of rocks and scrub brush. The rifle barked in her hands. She didn't waste shots. One of Thornton's men went down with a cry. Then another. Ellie drew his pistol, laying down cover fire, moving to flank the remaining men. He took a bullet in the shoulder, spinning him around, sending him sprawling. He gasped, pain searing through him, dropping his pistol. Thornton yelled something, charging towards Nea. She dropped behind a large boulder, the rifle spitting fire. Thornton crumpled, clutching his chest, the silver hatband glinting one last time before he fell face down in the dust. The remaining 2 men hesitated, then turned their horses and fled back the way they came. Silence fell, broken only by Ellie's ragged breathing and the distant sounds of the retreating horses. Nea ran to him, dropping the rifle. She knelt beside him, her face etched with concern. He tried to push himself up, but his arm wouldn't work. She put her arm around his good side, helping him sit up. He leaned heavily against her, the world spinning slightly. She didn't let him fall, held him steady. The small strength of her body a surprising anchor. Weeks passed. Ellie's shoulder healed slowly, a throbbing reminder of Mercy Ridge. They didn't stay there. Too many questions, too many ghosts. They found a small, sheltered meadow a few miles outside the settlement, near a creek that ran clear and bright. They started to build again. Not a cabin like the old one. Just a simple shack, sturdy enough to keep out the wind and rain. Together. Ellie working one-handed at first, and Nea, strong and capable, hauling logs, hammering nails. It was quiet work, companionable. Word had spread about the fight, about the Apache girl and the wounded man. People from Mercy Ridge came sometimes, bringing supplies, offering help. The men were wary at first. The women were curious. Nea didn't talk much, but she didn't hide. She showed them how to track rabbits, how to identify edible plants. Then one day she picked up Ellie's rifle. She walked to the edge of the meadow and set up some tin cans on a fallen log. A few kids from Mercy Ridge had tagged along with their parents. Apache kids, white kids, hesitant at first. Nea showed them how to hold the rifle, how to aim, how to breathe. Ellie sat by the small fire outside the shack, watching her patient movements, her quiet instructions. Watching the children, boys and girls, listen to her, take turns shooting, their faces a mixture of concentration and excitement. Nea laughed then, a clear sound that carried across the meadow, not the silent crying by the fire. A full, open laugh. It was a sound he hadn't heard before. He sat by the fire that didn't burn his home, but warmed him. He watched the girl he pulled from the river teach children how to stand their ground. and the world felt less broken than it had in a long time.